Welcome, thank you. What a great introduction, and thank you very much. Not that there's any pressure here. So I want to find out who's here today. How many people in this room would consider themselves providers? Okay. And how many people would consider themselves in the advocacy community? And how about state or government agencies, local government agencies? Okay. Okay, just so I know who's here. So now here's a really good question. How many of you have ever found a job, actually gotten a job, for a person with an intellectual or developmental disability? Raise your hand. Okay. Can I tell you what? Those people have worked harder than any of us have, because that is one of the hardest things in the world to do. It is really difficult, because you got to go so outside your own comfort zone and start asking people, can I come into your office and talk to you? Right? That's a really hard thing to do. So we always need to remember that when we think about our staff and all of the hard work that they do. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking a little bit about starting a movement, because that's what I did. I started a movement at a real micro level at Seek, and I started a movement at the macro level in the state of Maryland. And I want to charge each and every one of you today to start your own movement. Whether it is in your department, in your agency, in your county, in your state, whatever it is, your challenge today is to start a movement.
I want to start by asking everyone in the audience here a question. How many of you are completely comfortable with calling yourselves a leader? See, I've asked that question all the way across the country, and everywhere I ask it, no matter where, there's always a huge portion of the audience that won't put up their hand. And I've come to realize that we have made leadership into something bigger than us. We made it into something beyond us. We made it about changing the world. And we've taken this title of leader and we treat it as if it's something that one day we're going to deserve. But to give it to ourselves right now means a level of arrogance or cockiness that we're not comfortable with. And I worry sometimes that we spend so much time celebrating amazing things that hardly anybody can do, that we've convinced ourselves that those are the only things we're celebrating. And we start to devalue the things that we can do every day. And we start to take moments where we truly are a leader, and we don't let ourselves take credit for it, and we don't let ourselves feel good about it. And I've been lucky enough over the last 10 years to work with some amazing people who have helped me redefine leadership in a way that I think has made me happier. And with my short time today, I just want to share with you the one story that is probably most responsible for that redefinition. I went to a school on a little school called Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick. And on my last day there, a girl came up to me and she said, I remember the first time that I met you. And then she told me a story that happened 4 years earlier. She said, on my day before I started university, I was in a hotel room with my mom and my dad, and I was so scared and so convinced that I couldn't do this, that I wasn't ready for university, that I just burst into tears. And my mom and my dad were amazing. They were like, look, we know you're scared, but let's just go tomorrow. Let's go to the first day, and if at any point you feel as if you can't do this, that's fine. Just tell us, we will take you home. We love you no matter what. And she said, so I went the next day, and I was standing in line getting ready for registration, and I looked around and I just knew I couldn't do it. I knew I wasn't ready. I knew I had to quit. And she says, I made that decision, and as soon as I made it, there was this incredible feeling of peace that came over me. And I turned to my mom and my dad to tell them that we needed to go home. And just at that moment, you came out of the Student Union building wearing the stupidest hat I have ever seen in my life. It was awesome. And you had a big sign promoting Shinorama, which is Students Fighting Cystic Fibrosis, a charity I've worked with for years. And you had a bucket full of lollipops. And you were walking along and you were handing the lollipops out to people in line and talking about Shinorama. And all of a sudden, you got to me, and you just stopped, and you stared. It was creepy. This girl right here knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then you looked at the guy next to me, and you smiled, and you reached in your bucket, you pulled out a lollipop, and you held it out to him, and you said, you need to give a lollipop to the beautiful woman standing next to you. And she said, I have never seen anyone get more embarrassed faster in my life. He turned beet red, and he wouldn't even look at me, he just kind of held the lollipop out like this. And I felt so bad for this dude that I took the lollipop. And as soon as I did, you got this incredibly severe look on your face, and you looked at my mom and my dad, and you said, look at that, look at that. First day away from home, and already she's taking candy from a stranger. And she said everybody lost it. 20 feet in every direction, everyone started to howl. And I know this is cheesy, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but in that moment when everyone was laughing, I knew that I shouldn't quit. I knew that I was where I was supposed to be, and I knew that I was home. And I haven't spoken to you once in the 4 years since that day, but I heard that you were leaving. And I had to come up and tell you that you've been an incredibly important person in my life, and I'm gonna miss you. Good luck. And she walks away, and I'm flattened. And she gets about 6 feet away, she turns around and smiles and goes, you should probably know this too. I'm still dating that guy 4 years later. A year and a half after I moved to Toronto, I got an invitation to their wedding. Here's the kicker, I don't remember that. I have no recollection of that moment, and I've searched my memory banks because that is funny, and I should remember doing it, and I don't remember it. And that was such an eye-opening, transformative moment for me to think that maybe the biggest impact I'd ever had on anyone's life, a moment that had a woman walk up to a stranger 4 years later and say, you've been an incredibly important person in my life, was a moment that I didn't even remember. How many of you guys have a lollipop moment, a moment where someone said something or did something that you feel fundamentally made your life better? All right. How many of you have told that person they did it? See, why not? We celebrate birthdays where all you have to do is not die for 365 days. And yet we let people who have made our lives better walk around without knowing it. And every single one of you has been the catalyst for a lollipop moment. You have made someone's life better by something that you said or that you did. And if you think you haven't, think about all the hands that didn't go back up when I asked that question. You're just one of the people who hasn't been told. But it is so scary to think of ourselves as that powerful. It can be frightening to think that we can matter that much to other people. Because as long as we make leadership something bigger than us, as long as we keep leadership something beyond us, as long as we make it about changing the world, we give ourselves an excuse not to expect it every day from ourselves and from each other. Marianne Williamson said, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that frightens us. And my call to action today is that we need to get over that. We need to get over our fear of how extraordinarily powerful we can be in each other's lives. We need to get over it so we can move beyond it. And our little brothers and our little sisters, and one day our kids, or our kids right now, can watch us start to value the impact we can have on each other's lives more than money and power and titles and influence. We need to redefine leadership as being about lollipop moments. How many of them we create, how many of them we acknowledge, how many of them we pay forward, and how many of them we say thank you for. Because we've made leadership about changing the world, and there is no world. There's only 6 billion understandings of it. And if you change one person's understanding of it, one person's understanding of what they're capable of, one person's understanding of how much people care about them, one person's understanding of how powerful an agent for change they can be in this world, you've changed the whole thing. And if we can understand leadership like that, I think if we can redefine leadership like that, I think we can change everything. And it's a simple idea, but I don't think it's a small one. And I want to thank you all so much for letting me share it with you today.
So I'd like to say that he and I have been friends for a long time, and he purposely did that so that I could use his lollipop speech all over when I go and talk, but we have no relationship. Wasn't that amazing? Wasn't that amazing? So you all have lollipops. Can you grab your lollipops, please, for a moment? So, everybody have their lollipops? Okay. Do you think you can be the change you want the world to see? Do you think that you can impact one person's life? Do you think you can start a movement for one person, one department, one agency, one county, one state? Do you think you can do that? If you think you can at least impact one person's life, I want you to raise your lollipop. Okay. Thank you all for being here today. This has been great. My work is done. This is wonderful. I love this. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you how to do that and give you some tricks and tools of the trade and tricks, okay? Now, you can't share this stuff because this is all kind of a secret. We don't want everybody else to know how to make change happen, because then they might start to make change too. But just within this room, he's got a recording. We'll have to decide how we're going to play that recording. We want to keep it in this room, right? Because we don't want everybody else to know all of our tricks that we're going to use to make change happen and to make sure that we are having our lollipop moments. So here are the phases of change. Now, there's a lot of people who work for places like Booz Allen Hamilton, and those are all contractors in the DC area. Alvarez, there's all sorts of organizations. But all you really have to do is Google it. If you Google organizational change, 90% of the time you'll see these things. These are the steps in the process of change, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's what you have to do if you're going to do it for one person, one department, one agency, one county, or one state. It's the same steps. It's the same steps. And I know because you're here today, somebody allowed you to be here today, that somebody must believe in you enough to be able to do this. Okay? So the first thing you have to do is you have to find your song. Everybody's got a song. What's your song? What are the verse, what are the words, and what do you do? And how do you say it? My song, everybody works. People know that about me, everybody works. I'm going to share with you a tape of my friend Ken Capone. His is, everyone should make a living wage. What is your song? You need to think about what your song is. So you have a little guide right here on your table. And there's some directions on the back, some of this stuff. And on the other side, you might want to jot a little note down. Think about it. What is your song? What is your song? People should have rights. People should have choices. Everybody works. What is your song? You need to have that song so that you can sing it. Some people say elevator speeches are too long. They're too long. People need to know what it is you're saying. What do you believe in? Well, sometimes people can work if they have. Who's going to want to come along with you with that song, right? We want a song that's vibrant and sure, and there is no question. People can work if, no, I don't want to be a part of that song, right? The way you get followers is to have a really concise song that tells the story. So my son was doing, getting ready to write his college applications. Has anybody gone through that with their kids before? And, you know, it's like, it's got to be 500 words or something like that. And just so happened in Washington, D.C., the weekend that the Martin Luther King, it opened in October, the Martin Luther King Memorial. And he and I were down at that, and I looked around and I saw in 2 sentences that says there's little snippets of Martin Luther King's sayings around on the memorial. And in 2 sentences, he said what my son took about 1,000 words to say. And I had this real aha moment when we were down there, and I said to him, you have to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it till you can get it down to 2 sentences that says what you're talking about. So you do got to think about this stuff. You got to read some research. You might have to go visit some people. You might actually have to talk to somebody with a disability. You need to get some of that in your mind so that you can really get that song. What is that song? Everyone works? Tennessee works? Think work? What is that? What is your song that everybody who knows they come to you will do that song? So I'm going to share with you a video that is Ken Capone. He's a colleague of mine. So Maryland has 2 things going for us right now. We have an employment first strategy and strategic plan, much like what happens in Tennessee, but we also have a bill that was founded by our self-advocates to get rid of 14C in Maryland. Does everybody here know what 14C is? The sub-minimum wage certificate, right? So Ken's going to talk about that a little. I'm going to talk about Maryland Works, or about the our strategic plan. Let's see if we can get this going now. Hello, my name is Karen Lee, and I am the DDA Public Policy Fellow for Employment First. I'm joined today by Ken Capone, who is the Public Policy Director for People on the Go Maryland, as well as an employee at the Maryland Center for Developmental Disabilities. Both Ken and I are board members of the Maryland APSE chapter as well. We're going to talk today a little bit about the work that has been done in Maryland to increase opportunities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to work in competitive integrated employment.
For many years, people with disabilities have fought for equality and full integration into society. While our nation has made important strides in fighting disability discrimination, there are still people with disabilities who still struggle to have access to meaningful employment. You may ask what constitutes as meaningful employment. My answer is that meaningful employment must provide a living wage, where a person with a disability has the ability to obtain the same things as someone without a disability.
What do you mean by the same things, Ken?
This can range from the ability to buy a sandwich to those much larger life decisions like buying a house or a vehicle. I can tell you through personal experience that my life has been enriched through having a job which provides me the ability to have my own house, my own vehicle, and much more.
So Maryland is really a shining example of a state that has done the 2 steps necessary to increase competitive integrated employment for people with disabilities. And that is to change the system at the same time as building the capacity. And that was done through the Maryland State Strategic Plan for Employment First, but also the legislation that you worked very hard on. And the visioning and stakeholder engagement has created a real opportunity here in Maryland.
Through the Employment First policy and strategic plan, the state of Maryland has joined with other states across the country to say firmly that we believe employment should be the first and preferred option for people with disabilities, regardless of the severity of the disability. There's much work that remains to be done in this area. The fact is, people with disabilities make up the largest minority group in the country. We also have the highest rates of unemployment and underemployment. Being an employment-first state, Maryland is beginning to see the dawn of a new day where people with disabilities will work alongside their non-disabled peers, and through the wages they earn, they will have the opportunity to purchase homes, vehicles, or something as simple as buying a piece of candy.
I'm going to speak a little bit about the journey of Maryland's Developmental Disabilities Administration to our strategic plan for increasing competitive integrated employment, our Employment First strategic plan. In June of 2015, we gathered a large group of people, 150 people, to talk about where Maryland was with competitive integrated employment. And the result of that was a gathering of about 8 groups around the state to talk about various subjects like finance, capacity building, training, technical assistance, important parts of making change to the state. And we gathered throughout the course of the year, and at the end of the year, we brought back together each of the group's goals, outcomes, and strategic moves, and created a state strategic plan for implementing Employment First. Concurrent to the capacity building work that we were doing with Employment First strategic plan, a group of advocates started to meet to talk about how do we get rid of 14C and the use of sub-minimum wage certificates so that folks can work competitively in the community. And Ken, if you would like to talk a little bit about the Equal Employment Act, I'd appreciate that.
The Equal Employment Act is legislation that will phase out the use of special wage certificates in the state of Maryland over the next 4 years, so providers of service are not allowed to pay people with disabilities less than the applicable state or local minimum wage.
Ken, what was the catalyst or the vision behind starting this legislation?
The proposed legislation had been in the making for a while. Advocates such as National Federation of the Blind, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, and People on the Go started talking about sheltered workshops / sub-minimum wage and the idea of legislation in 2014. We started researching other states to see where the trend and policy was going. We have always believed that paying people sub-minimum wage is a violation of civil rights.
People are really interested around the country about how this came to be. A lot of folks are wanting something to replicate the work that you have done in their own state. Can you talk a little bit about the real process that it takes to go from an idea to a bill?
We embarked upon the task of campaigning within the General Assembly itself. Thanks to the contributions of Senator Kelly and Delegate Waldstreicher, our coalition was able to move forward with an idea as to who would be receptive to the legislation and who might need a little coaxing. We started walking / wheeling the blue back around the legislature to get sign-ons for co-sponsors. We were amazed how many legislators were not aware of the practice of paying people with disabilities sub-minimum wage. After we met with legislators and explained what the bill would do, we had a lot of co-sponsors.
Tell me a little bit about what's exactly in the final version of the law.
It prohibits new 14C certificates from being authorized to any organizations that don't currently hold a certificate. Those that do currently hold 14C certificates will be able to extend them until 2020. creates a set of benchmarks and desired outcomes for each year of the phase-out to ensure people with disabilities are given the opportunity for employment in the community and of their choosing.
We found the same thing was true, Ken, with the strategic plan as well, that it takes a lot of people to be on board, and some people may not support it in the beginning, but as we go along. So we were very, very thoughtful in Maryland. It takes a great, great vision, and Deputy Secretary Simons had a real vision for employment first, and we took that vision and brought together a large group of stakeholders and continue to engage people and to do community talks and to meet with providers, meet with families, and continue to work with everybody around making sure that there's an opportunity for voices to be heard. And it takes everybody together just to make something happen. And so I think that the journey of the Equal Employment Act and the journey of the strategic plan were very much the same. So that's great. So what I did is, so I'm going to tell you a little bit, go back a little bit and tell you a little bit about my story so I can walk you through this as well. So I'm a provider of 27 years. Is there anybody here who works for St. John's? A couple people work for St. People know who St. John's is? Or, okay, so I worked for St. John's in 1986 when they used to be on MacArthur Boulevard in Washington, D.C. And I started the community-based employment and supports program for Jenny Sasnat way back then. She had purple hair. Now she has gray hair, but she used to have purple hair. And so I've always believed that folks should be in the community. And I'm a provider of services like many of the people in here today. I've been doing it for 27 years. Organization, we support about 300 people. We have about a 56% employment rate, so of everybody we support, people with really, really significant disabilities. We do some project search, we do some other things. And we kept hitting this glass ceiling. Like, I can't get our VR and our DD to speak, and I can't get through the system. Everyone's going, yeah, I got that, right? So I kept trying to get things to happen in the state of Maryland, and they wouldn't. Like the policies were wrong, it didn't fit, the way they're paying us for employment doesn't really work, you know, it's flat. When in reality, we need a lot more money when we're learning about people. We need a lot more money when we're helping them to find the job, and then hopefully we need less money along the way. And we just got this flat amount of money, it doesn't work that way. And we really needed to make change in Maryland. So I was talking to the Deputy Secretary in Maryland for the Department of Disabilities, and I said, the Developmental Disabilities Administration, and I said, we got to make this change. And he said, put your money where your mouth is. Come and work with me for a while. And I thought, yeah, right, me at the state. I mean, that'd be like, you know, think of some of you and like I'd go work at the state. Of course I'm not going to go. They're a mess. Why would I do that? And I really believed him, though. I believed that this was a real priority of his. So I went to work at the state for a year and a half. I'm on loan. I'm still at SEEK, still doing that job, but I'm on loan. So when I started to investigate all the other states, and there's a lot of states out there that have strategic plans, like and here's the other thing, you got to figure out how to name your strategic plan, because Massachusetts has the blueprint to employment, South Dakota has the path to employment, and Ohio has the roadway to employment, right? So you got to kind of find a way to what you're going to say. So a lot of different states did it a lot of different ways. And I thought, you know, when I did it back at SEEK in this certain way, go back to your card, this is what I used. This is what I did at SEEK. When we used to have a center-based services, this is what I did. Pretty easy, right? I gathered information. I set a vision, real clear vision, everybody works. Then we brought along our stakeholders, families. Here we did some tricky things at SEEK, like bringing along the stakeholders. When we first started meeting, I met with my board of directors for 1 year to talk about nothing but moving us forward. 1 full year. I found articles that I thought were really good. I videotaped them, and then I taped them on The Voice so that they could put them in their DVDs at home. This is back when they had DVDs. They could put in CDs, they could download it to their iPod. Now you could do podcasts. But so that they would listen to it, because it was really important to me that my board listen. I found other providers in the country who had already gone through this transformation, and I asked their executive directors and board members if they would be a mentor to my board members so that they could call when they had questions. So we had people who were from Florida, and we had Iowa, and we had somebody from Colorado who all volunteered, and they all said, absolutely, I'd be happy to. We went and visited places. We went and visited people who had already done this. Really, really strategic and thoughtful about how to bring stakeholders along. When we started meeting with parents, we met at bakeries. Always bring food. Always bring food. You know that trick, right? Right. So we met at bakeries, small groups of them. We knew which parents were going to be the difficult communication hubs. So we did things, little things like working with them on their particular son or daughter if we knew it was going to be really tough. Okay? So, but now at a state level, what do? Well, you got to do the same thing. You got to bring people along because not everybody in the state believes the same way. So I spent a lot of time with our provider association, talking to them, listening to them. I showed them pictures. I had people come in from the outside. So I really brought the stakeholders along. Okay? We did a great big gathering in July of 2015. 150 people, room like this. And we had people stand up and talk about what was happening in employment in their organizations. And we didn't know what was happening. We had no idea how many things were happening. So after that gathering, we did this. See these things down here? We broke up into groups because we knew we needed to be really, really strategic about putting together a plan. That's the next thing on here. Right? So after you gather your tribe, here's a tribe right here. Look who's around you. Here's the help that you need. So I do want to tell you this real quickly. Do you know this? Have you seen this before? So this has got there's some great statistics here that are really easy for folks to know. So think about what your song is. Do you guys kind of have an idea of what your song is? Raise your lollipop if you think you know what your song is. Okay, some people know. Great, great. Once you have your song, you gather your tribe. So this is the most important thing, I think, in this process to get you over being scared. This is the most important thing. Let's say that there's 100 people at your organization. Let's say there's 100 families that you work with. Let's say there's 100 other people in state agencies that you have to deal with. Okay? Let's just use that number 100. What this says is, once you know your song, all you need is 2 other people. That's all you have to do. You just have to tell 2 other people and that's your tribe. Because what happens when you sing your song, you bang your drum, and you got those 2 people? What happens? What do you think happens? They both go get 2 people, right? So now you got 9, right? So we're only at 100 people, as an example. So now there's 9 people. And if those 9 people each go get 2 people, and so on, you've got a movement. You've got the innovators, that's you. That's all of you who raised your lollipop. Every single person in this room who has a song, or who believes they can impact one person's life, you've already made that commitment, and I know all your names. And I'm going to check up on you to make sure you've impacted one person. And this is what you do. You just find 2 people. Just 2 people. And then the early adopters come along. That's the next group of people. Now you've got something going. Then you've got the early majority, and that's when it splits. That's when people know it's more cool to be a part of your team, a part of your tribe, singing your song than not. Right? Then they look bad if they're not willing to sing your song. So then you get the late majority people, and the laggards, you know what they usually do? Find someplace else to work. Find someplace else to get their services, right? They generally don't hang around. So you generally lose about 1/3 of the people in this process, right? But do you really want them around if they're not willing to sing with you? If they're not willing to sing the song as well? Okay, so that's what we did in Maryland. We brought together groups in this big group, and we said, who wants to be involved? And the cool people wanted to be involved. The people wanted to be involved. And this is what we did. We divided everybody up according to what they wanted to do in these different groups right here. Okay? So these are the groups that we did. So I think even if you're doing an IP for one person, or a job development plan for one person, or you're working with a department, or an agency, or a county, or the state, it's all the same kind of groups, right? What's the leadership around this? That's you with your lollipop. What's the leadership? How is this being said? How is this being told? You guys have a great communication system here in Tennessee. Collaboration. How are you working with others on that person's team, in your department, in your agency, in your county, in the state? How are you collaborating? And what do you need to collaborate on? And what are the policies? What are the things getting in your way, right? So one of the policies when you're working on this at an agency level might be, can't drive your people in your vehicles. Well, how can I go job develop with somebody if I can't drive them in my vehicle? That's a policy getting in your way. At the state level, policies that get in your way are that you can't use vocational rehab and DD money at the same time for the same person. That might be getting in your way. Transitioning youth, they don't get to start looking for a job and they don't get to have a relationship with their adult provider until they've graduated. That's a policy getting in our way. So what are the policies getting in your way that you need to have fixed? And that's what this group did. They identified that. How's your waiver? Well, your waiver's good. I've read your waiver. But what are the problems? Funding, right? Funding, of course, always a big problem. We could do it if we had more money. Has anybody heard that before? We could do it if we had more money. Well, here's the thing, you aren't getting it. You got to learn how to slice the pie differently, right? So I'm a part of a group of women called the Scary Broads. Have you ever heard of us? I mean, we really are a group of women called the Scary Broads. And I hope I don't offend anybody here, but this is what the Scary Broads say. Stop doing, right? Stop doing the stuff that isn't trying to get you where your song is. So what's your song? If your song is Everybody Works, and you're spending your valuable resources on helping people to do something that isn't that, then you're wasting money. Stop doing the stuff that isn't going to help you to sing the song, right? So funding, that's a really tricky funding thing. So there's all sorts of values around funding. Then we had training. We had a group of people who were looking at training. And the things they were looking at, like the certification, qualifications of staff, who can do that. I'm doing a presentation tomorrow on a webinar on training. And I'm starting off and I wish I could show it to you. I have a picture of a guy who had a really, really bad haircut, and then a picture of a guy who had a really great haircut, right? We go to people to cut our hair because we know they've been trained and certified. We expect that they can do it. Everybody in this room has the ability to use the scissors and to cut. It doesn't make you a hairstylist. You're not trained, you're not certified, right? I can't trust that that's going to happen. So why in the world do we have folks out there doing job supports for people, a highly technical, highly skilled area, who don't have training and certification? You know, that's ridiculous. So we're talking a lot about that. Services, well, there's a lot of different service models. I looked at your provider transformation, and I hope everybody in this room has looked at the Tennessee provider transformation, what is it called? The assessment, self-assessment. If you have not looked at that document, that is the best piece of written research I think that's out there right now in plain English that will talk about the different service models. Well done. Well done. So we're talking about services in Maryland. Then we're talking about evaluation. You gotta do the evaluation. You gotta know your numbers. How many people are working now? How many people are working later, right? The evaluation. How many hours is he working now? How many hours? So really at the individual level, at the micro level, all the way up to the state level. You gotta know it. You know why? Because you have to tell stories. Because one way to get your song sung, one way to gather more people in your tribe is if you tell your stories. You have to tell your stories. And whether you're just telling your story to another parent, or you're telling the story to the legislature, you have DD Day at the legislature as well, right? Then you just got to do it. You just have to do it. So you go back to these things, you have to set your vision, right? That's your song. What's your song? You have to bring your stakeholders along, gather your tribe. Who is in your tribe? You got to create the plan. This is the way that we created a plan to make sure that we got everything covered. Because what if we did all this and then there was no money, the money wasn't right for it? You got to have funding. What if you do all this and you don't rewrite your waiver? You got to have the policy thing right, right? So you got to have everything right. This is just a really good framework. There's other frameworks people may use, Baldwin method. There's a lot of other frameworks out there, frameworks for change. This is the framework that we use to make sure we covered everything. Then we created a strategic plan. Everybody got together, we created a great big strategic plan, and now we're implementing that plan. It's a great strategic plan. I encourage you to go to just Google Maryland DDA, go to employment, and our strategic plan is right there. Then you got to implement the plan, right? I mean, doesn't this sound like I'm doing training on how to do an IP, right? You do an evaluation, you have an annual meeting, right, along the same way. And you got to keep track of the progress, and you got to tell the stories. So, here are some of the things I wanted to just tell you that we're doing in Maryland right now. So in Maryland, we've submitted a new waiver. We have new waiver amendments, and they knew what to do. The DDA knew what to do because we've been feeding them information all along. We weren't reactive because they were a part of the dialogue. DDA was a part of the dialogue. We have new funding protocols coming out. You can't change one thing without changing the other at the state system. We started to collaborate, right? People wanted to be at the table. I don't know if this happens in your state, but in our state, Voc Rehab, Labor, Commerce, and DD, the only time they got together was when the governor brought the cabinet level people together. There wasn't a lot of discussion going on. But when we started singing the song and we started using words like workforce development, employment, employers, Commerce said, well, we've got to be at the table. We're Commerce. If employers aren't here, we've got to be at the table. We have the new Equal Employment Act that says by 2020, no one can receive sub-minimum wage in Maryland. We're the second state in the country to have that. Thank you. That happened as the result of a huge collaboration using these exact same steps. Everybody should earn a living wage. I like to think of it this way. You've got your systems change side and you've got your capacity building side, right? So I see the law, the Equal Employment Act, as a way to build the capacity. I see that as the way, as to change the system. DDA and Maryland Department of Disabilities, you must have a plan. You must tell us what the barriers to employment are, right? And then the capacity building is what we're doing with the strategic plan in all of these areas, okay? We have a new MIS system, you got to put the data in, you got to keep it there. New website, some of that stuff going on. So we're building the infrastructure at the same time. One of the questions I get most from providers is, what do I do with my truck? What do I do with my vans? That's the first question. If you're starting with one person and that's all you're supposed to start with, just one person. And do you know who to start with? Anybody have an idea? If you're going to start this with one person, who do you start with? We call it the low-hanging fruit. You start with the person who's willing to let you make a mistake, the person who's most unhappy. And we all know what that looks like, don't we? Their moms are calling us every single day. They're throwing staplers across the room, right? We know what the low-hanging fruit is. We know who that is. We know who it is that's the most unhappy, that's going to willingly let us make mistakes as we try this. Okay? So as an individual provider agency, you choose the person-centered planning process that you're going to choose. Do you guys use a specific person-centered planning process, MAPS, PATH, essential lifestyle planning? What do you use? PATH. Lots of different things that people use out there. Okay. Start with one person at a time. Start with one person at a time. Oh, but what about all this van? Start with one person at a time. It's the hardest. And what are we going to do about transportation? Job development starts in the driveway. Job development starts in the driveway. When you pick somebody up at home and you bring them to a center and you take them to a job and you bring them back to the center and then you bring them home, now I know why your transportation costs are so high. When he could do that same job walking distance from his home. Job development does not start in the parking lot of the agency. It starts in the home. In the person's home. It starts at their driveway. You got to build some capacity with staff. You got to train them. You got to love them. You got to train them. So one of the things that Jeremy didn't say is the organization that I work with just won the Moving Mountains Award. You know that? This is National Direct Support Professional Week. Do you all know that? NADSP, the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals. It's National Direct Support Professional Week. And they have an award they give every year, and the organization that I run won that award this year because we love our staff. Tomorrow when I go back, you know what we're doing? Car washes. I've been getting emails all day about who's bringing the brush and who's bringing the music because we're washing the cars of the staff. Love the people who are doing the work. Love the people doing the work. And then you end by telling stories. Lots of stories. All sorts of really good stories. So I'm going to tell you about Fred. Fred loves kids. Loves kids. Loves to be around them. Loves to laugh with them. Loves to do things with them. But we're not jumping to a job just because Fred says he loves kids. Everybody goes, what's the first thing you say when somebody says they love kids? Daycare. Absolutely. Daycare. I have to tell you, I love Fred. I think he's a wonderful guy. There is no way I'm going to let him be the daycare provider in our local daycare. And there ain't no way. I know Fred. It's not going to hurt anybody. Somebody might get hurt because Fred's not watching because he's playing, right? So how do you do that? So we do a lot of work around Fred. Fred is a guy that everybody said, of course, will never work, right? He doesn't have a lot of verbal skills. But I'll tell you one thing Fred does. He does love to party. And he knows what you're supposed to have at a party. He knows the food you have at a party. He knows how to set a room up for a party. Fred works at Sky Zone. Do you guys have Sky Zone? Yes. Yeah. So Fred works at Sky Zone. He's the party planner. He gets a sheet of paper, and we have pictures on it of all the different things that have to go on at Sky Zone, and he puts a party together. So there's certain things that you get with your party. You get the bags, you get the hot dogs, you get the pizza, you get well, but not every party gets everything. So his boss puts down on a piece of paper his pictures of what goes into each party room and how many people. He's a great party planner, right? So that's Philip. Philip is somebody else who he texts really funny things, but he doesn't use his voice to speak. And he texts things like lolly funny music. You don't really know what he means by it, but he's got great texting skills. And so he was out walking with somebody one day, and they said. And he went and pet the dog, and the person they started talking, they said, oh, and Philip wanted to walk the dog, and they said, would you mind if you walk the dog? And the guy said, quite honestly, I'm home from my lunch break. If Philip came by my house every day, I'd pay him to do this. So he started his own little business just from going out on a walk in his neighborhood, and he walks a dog. So what happens when you walk a dog? Somebody else sees you walk the dog. So now he has a whole business. He has 4 people that work for him because so many people saw him walking the dog during the day. But he uses his phone because people text him to tell him, come today or don't come today, right? So he doesn't have a voice, doesn't use his voice to communicate, but he uses his phone to text. This is Joe. He's a librarian. He works at the YMCA. And Joe is also somebody who has very significant support needs. And Joe works at the YMCA, and he delivers the books to the classrooms, and he has them loaded on his iPad, and he comes into the room, gets off his chair, sits on the floor, and he can push the button on the iPad, and the iPad tells the story. And the kids lay on him. You know, they lay over him and around him and on him. And he does this 3 days a week for about 4 hours each day, because there's like 5 different rooms that he goes into. These are all people that everybody said no way would they work. There is no way that they'll ever work. But we start telling these stories over and over and over, and what happens is people want to be a part of it, right? Joe becomes the lollipop man just by living. So if you help one person find a job, or you set something up so one person can find a job, you pass your lollipop on. And then their work and what they do and how they are seen becomes their lollipop. And the impact that you have by starting a movement just starts with one thing and one person. That's all you have to do to start a movement. So I want to thank everybody very much for being here today, and hope that you take some time to actually think about what your song is, and that you do sing it, and that you do keep it loud. Thank you.